So my name is Allison, and I live in Amarillo, Texas. My disease affiliation is adrenoleukodystrophy, both as the daughter of a patient. So my father had adrenoleukodystrophy, and he had adult cerebral onset um, form of the disease. And then I am an AMN patient as well. I was about 12 years old when I found out I was a carrier of my condition. Well, adrenoleukodystrophy, as far as I know, is a spinal cord disease, and anything that affects your spinal cord is probably going to be impacted by adrenoleukodystrophy. In my dad's case, it was cerebral form, which also impacted his brain and his white matter in his brain. And so for me, I became symptomatic about 6 years ago. I'm 42 now, and so I was about 36, late 30s, mid 30s, and started noticing problems with balance, muscle tone, spasticity, and some dysregulation of like sleep and what I would refer to as a deterioration, probably of my mental health. All kind of at the same time. I was going through a lot at the time too. I had just lost my sister-in-law to cancer, so I was under a lot of stress and obviously grieving, and then also worrying about my brother and his kids. So there was a lot of unknowns at the time. But for me, I think the primary symptoms, like I said, were the weakness, the falling, and then the muscle spasticity. So those are things that continue to this day. And I have sought a lot of help for those, both mental health therapy and physical therapy that have helped quite a bit. Well, considering my age, I'm a little bit further along in that than most people that find out nowadays. They have a lot more options than they did. So when I was 12, they let me know that I would carry children that would be affected by the disease. They gave me the 50-50 chance. And I did work with a genetic counselor after I was married and discussed options. But for me, the decision was made probably when I was about 15. I nearly died of cyst rupturing on my ovaries. And so I have polycystic ovarian syndrome, unfortunately, and pretty severe endometriosis as well. So I was not in a place physically where I was really able to have children anyway after that initial surgery. And so from 12 to 15, I had a few years um, to consider what the options were. And then at 15, when I had my major surgery, they let me know how difficult childbearing would actually be for me. And so it never really was an option. I got married at about 23 and had a hysterectomy, a medically necessary hysterectomy at 25. So between 23 and 25, I had to have a lot of conversations again with genetic counseling, but then also I saw several OBGYNs and considered what options I had, and they were very limited. And so just for me, became evident both for my future and for just the uh, overall well-being for my life, that I would have that hysterectomy as both a life-saving measure, but also as a form of birth control, because by that point I'd pretty much ruled out any option as far as like IVF or any kind of genetic, you know, testing or anything like that. Financially, one, it was beyond my ability to pay for in my 20s, but then two, it was also just a matter of like my long-term health. So not a lot of options for me. But I do understand now that people have a lot more, and I think I was just about 10 years ahead, age-wise, of what was capable at the time. I would say I've considered all of them. That has definitely been on the table for me personally. The complexity was that it wasn't on the table in my marriage. And so there was a lot of conversation about fostering and adoption, but as well as, having an egg donor and a surrogate. So those things have been ongoing conversations throughout my adulthood. And that marriage ended. And so, there are lots of possibilities, right? Now that I could consider, and I am having conversations with my husband about. We've sort of aged out of having children at a young age when most people do it. We're past that point now. But I think both of us are open to ideas and possibilities, especially knowing what we know now. I do still have one remaining ovary. And so, there's this whole world of science out there that we'd have to explore to consider any possible healthy child outcome. But at the same time, again, the financial aspect of it, the time aspect, the emotional, mental toll that avenue could take. We haven't really landed on any kind of decision or any avenue that we want to pursue right now. Still exploring all the options as far as fostering and adoption are concerned. But I think we're about a year and a half into our marriage, and so I think most people would understand that that's a big step to take. So we're giving each other plenty of time. Well, like I mentioned, I think financial obstacles were very much a part of the equation, especially in my 20s. I wouldn't say that that's not still an obstacle today. When you start thinking about raising kids anyway, they're expensive. Doesn't matter how you do it. And so it's just a matter of deciding, in our lives what priority we want to place on having a family, and then, meeting those needs in the best way possible, so that everybody's living, the best life that we can, with constraints and all that kind of stuff. I think the other one for me is, as I've gotten older, I grew up with a dad. I was very young. I never really knew my dad without a disability. And so for me, knowing that as I age, my health has a tendency, just from the last 6 years, to decline. I've kind of plateaued, I feel like, especially with physical therapy. I've been doing a lot of physical therapy. I have actually probably plateaued, where I have not seen an increase in symptoms over the last 2 years, and some have actually improved, which has been great. But I also want to consider what kind of lifestyle, a child would be a part of if I were to get much worse, especially while they're young. So that's another consideration that I've always had, just having experienced that myself as a child. And then the trauma, obviously, of losing my dad was a big part of my childhood, which was not something that was easily worked through. And, anybody who's had any experience with this disease, especially the cerebral form, understands that it's pretty traumatic. The degeneration of physical function and mental and physical capacity to actually even be present declines very quickly. And so it requires a significant amount of care. And so that's just something that, like I said, having experienced as a child, those are considerations I'm making for any future children. And then two, just wanting to understand, whether or not any kind of biological child is even part of the picture, whether or not we adopt or foster to adopt, or honestly just foster without adoption being an outcome. I know that there's enough challenges already in that equation, both from their past and any legal and financial challenges that there may be, right? That those are all things to consider when you have a serious illness as well. What kind of physical or emotional toll will you take on in that situation? And then also, am I physically and mentally in a place where I'm able to offer the best of myself to those children that have those kinds of needs, and so these are all things that when we talk, we take into consideration. And again, we've had that conversation over the past 3 years of whether or not this is something we even want to do. Just one, just the desire to do it, and then two, how would we do it to the best of our ability. And I don't think either one of us has arrived at any conclusion. We've just enjoyed getting to be married and getting to know each other and kind of start building that life together right now. And like I said, having already lived a good chunk of my parenting years, right, from 20s to 40s, um, and lived it well and been very satisfied, had a career and had tons of friends with kids and aunts. I'm an aunt to, you know, 10 kids and all those fun things that we get to do. I don't feel like whether I make the choice to bring a child into our family or not, I don't feel like there's any um, lack of fulfillment on either side of that way of living. It probably would have been wise to talk to more than one genetic counselor. Um, and the only reason I say that is because, and it's so tied to the time at which I had that conversation in my 20s, because again, there weren't a lot of options then. This would have been the early 2000s, and a lot of what we're doing now, they just weren't doing then. And so um, I think just from what little I remember of that conversation with that genetic counselor, obviously they weren't going to push me one way or another. But I had that conversation before I had my medical hysterectomy, and and to sort of firm up the decision to do that, to go forward with that. But I think it might have been helpful to say, oh, let's freeze some eggs, or let's do an egg retrieval and have some embryos just in case you change your mind, or you know what I mean, something along those lines. And um, I don't know that a genetic counselor would have necessarily supported that conversation versus actually going to a fertility clinic and having that conversation. um, but even now, and like I said, having that marriage having ended and being in a new one, it's like none of those choices would have been relevant to this life I'm living now anyway. I don't look back and go, what if, or shoulda, woulda, coulda. Like, there's none of that. And so I do feel like living the way that I chose to live without proceeding with any fertility options again didn't have an impact on my life that has caused any regret or any lack of fulfillment. And as an individual, but also as a married person and as a daughter and an aunt and a wife, and everyone in my family knew the circumstances that surrounded all those choices. And so and even when I explain it to other new families or new friends or anything like that, I'm fully accepted for the choices that I made. And I've had no negative feedback in a long time. um, Probably had a little bit more at the beginning, but just because people didn't fully understand how complex the situation was, right? That they're just their best intentions, they just didn't understand it, so they had a little bit more to say about it than they should have. But that only furthered my decision of like, well, this is my decision and I'm not going to base it on anybody else's opinion or experience or anything like that. So yeah, I think maybe just one or two more conversations potentially, but in the end I don't know that the outcome would have been any different. I think where I probably look back now and wish I had done more, if it were possible, would to have been a little bit more connected to organizations like Remember the Girls, right? And having the option for these conversations sooner in my life, just to sort of cheer on other people. that, are in the middle of this kind of conversation or decision, for their lives, and just to encourage them and say, you know, here's what I did, and this is why I did it, and this is the result, and this is the kind of life I've lived, just so there's that other voice out there, but that's why I'm doing this kind of stuff now, and just like, wisdom tells you, okay, you can reach out to people, you can have these conversations, you can have interviews, you can write things down, you can share a testimony, whatever it takes, just so other people in the same situation don't feel alone. I think the adult onset form is far rarer, than the childhood form. And so I think we're kind of a very small segment of the disease population, right? Where you would know, right, as a child or a preteen, that you're a carrier of the disease, let alone that you're probably going to experience the symptoms of the disease yourself. Which when I was younger, that was not the case. They let you know, like, oh, you won't be affected, you won't have any symptoms, this isn't anything you need to worry about. Now we know that's not true. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think just getting involved now, in the last few years, I would say probably 10 years ago, I attended my first conference and met other people, that experienced this kind of lifestyle, and met some of the other patients of things. And I was just really blown away by the community and the support. And now I attend the conferences, and I'm a part of the calls and all that kind of stuff. And it just broadened my horizons quite a bit of like what each and every individual and each and every family goes through. And so I'm just trying to be that for other people and say, here's one way to live, here's one choice you can make, here's one possibility and one outcome, and this is what it did for me, and this is how my life has gone. And then, if that helps one person, great. you know it would have been nice to have had something like that, at 12 or 15 or even 25, when I was choosing my hysterectomy, over fertility. So but those are the things that this group and this community, does, and that's why I'm a part of it now. Like I said, this life can be very fulfilling in itself, regardless of what decision you make. And I know lots of people make lots of decisions, and I support all of them. And I think we're all willing to support each other in whatever decision each and every individual makes, right? So that's the beauty of it.